Okay, thank you. I'm going to time myself. Hi guys. My name is Francine. I'm an alcoholic. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I want to first say thank you to Stephen and everyone else doing service in this meeting. You know, I was in a meeting recently, and it's not the first time I heard this. There are two things I've heard recently that to me are like totally ridiculous. And so just so you know, this is my opinion. One thing is that you cannot do service on Zoom. I think that is one of the most ridiculous things I've heard in 2.5 years, because obviously you can. Stephen's doing service. Everyone who's read, I'm showing up doing service. So I really want to thank you, Stephen, for this really sweet invitation. The other thing that I heard was that you can't have a real AA meeting and be on Zoom. So that's the other totally ridiculous thing I've heard, because this is a real AA meeting. And our traditions tell us that where two or more gather together for the sole purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous, we get to have a meeting. So if you're new and you've heard that if you're on Zoom, you're not in a real meeting, yes, you are. Yes, you are. And yes, you are. This is a real AA meeting. I didn't realize that this was the Tri-Cities. You know, I've actually been there. And I actually went to 2 AA meetings in the Tri-Cities, right near the downtown area of Johnson City, right downtown. So, Stephen, I might have bumped into you at a meeting, because one of the things that I remembered about that meeting, and it was one of the meetings I went to, was so fabulous. There were about 45 people in this room around a table, and there were like 13 people with decades of sobriety. They had, you know, there was an anniversary, and there were a couple of people with more time than me, but there were people within their 20s and 30s, and I was super impressed. So I just want you to know I've definitely been to your part of the country, and I look forward to coming back again, because there's a writers' conference that I like to attend there. So there, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous is everywhere. It does not matter where we are. Welcome if you're new. Again, I just want to say welcome to the first day of the rest of your life. And if you are new in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're probably thinking, yeah, right. Yeah, right. You know, she doesn't even know what she's talking about. Some old timer that just is full of herself. No, I'm telling you, welcome. You know, and if you are with us tonight, honestly, all I invite you to do is just take in whatever you can. It might not be everything. There are going to be things I share that you're not going to agree with. It's okay. Just don't pick up, get to the next meeting, and it's amazing what you'll find will happen if you just stay with us. My sobriety date is July 26, 1979. I have not put a drink or a drug in my body in over 42 years. And if I don't die or pick up between now and next month, I actually get to celebrate 43 years. And I'll tell you, I'm 69 years old, and I don't know which of those numbers blows me away more, that I am old or that I'm old. But the truth is, it's like when you get to be sober, anything is possible. And the fact that I am coming up on 70, I mean, even saying that, just, did I really say 70? Yep, I did. And this guy's looking he's getting closer to take a look. Yes, I wear a lot of makeup. I'm coming up on 70, and it's a good thing. But that's because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And women like me, women who've come from the places I've come from, women who have lived the life I lived before I got here, we don't get to show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, but for the grace of God in AA. I want to read something for you. This is a document that I found about it. Actually, it was last year. I found it stuck in one of my files. And some of you have heard me when I share this, but it's so powerful. You know, for me, I know my history, but when I see it on paper, it's like, there's no mistaking, there's no pretending, there's no lying to you. There's no telling you I came from a place where I grew up with a white picket fence. Nope. So this is a piece of paper. It's kind of tattered and torn, and it's dated June 25th, 1972. So I was pretty young. I was 19 years old when this document was issued to me. And it was issued to me by the criminal court of the city of New York. And I'm just going to read a few of the many charges on this piece of paper. Most of it's kind of faded, but there's some of the things here that really stand out. So criminal trespass, possession of burglar tools, solicitation, criminal mischief, petty larceny, criminal tampering. I mean, there's just a litany of things here, and some of them are disguised. Really, what's underneath is prostitution, like trespass. I look at something like this and I think to myself sometimes, but that can't be. You know, that can't be where I've come from. I look at myself today, I don't dress the same, I don't smell the same. The way I carry myself is different. The language I use to describe anything and everything is different. My profession is different, although I must tell you there are some people who think there's a very thin line between a hooker and a lawyer, but I understand that there's a difference, you know, and it would be easy for me to forget that this is where I've come from because I look at me today and that's not who I am. And so, you know, for me, the power in anything I have to say is really the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. I get to sit here this evening. I get to be the woman that I am because of what Alcoholics Anonymous not only has given me, but what it has enabled me to give to myself. So just to step back, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1953. And I don't remember an awful lot about growing up as a little kid in the South. You know, I'd love to tell you that I remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I kind of do because I eat the same thing every day. I eat oatmeal. But if you ask me what else I did yesterday without looking at my calendar, I wouldn't be able to tell you. So I definitely can't tell you I remember everything I did when I was a little girl. But you know what I do remember? I remember how I felt. I remember that even as a little kid, I always felt like a square peg in a round hole. I never, ever quite fit. You know, I always felt like I was different. I was born in the South, but my mother moved us to New York when I was 6 years old. So at 6 years old, you know, being in the big city in New York, I was different. I stood out like a sore thumb, and the kids made me feel that way. You know, I had a really strong Southern drawl, if you can possibly imagine. I don't have it today, except when I talk about y'all and I talk about having sweet tea. But when I was a kid, I had a really strong Southern drawl, and the kids used to make fun of me. They'd beat me up. After I'd leave from school, they'd pull on my hair and they'd throw my school books on the ground. I mean, and they'd call me all kinds of names. And when I was a kid, I didn't have the kind of program for living, that says you don't have to tolerate that. I didn't have the program for living that I have today that said you can't let them, or you don't have to let them control how you feel about yourself. And so everything anybody said about me, I was like a sponge. I just, you know, it just went into my soul. It went into my being. And because of that, eventually I had to find a way to deal with that. My earliest escape in life came through books and movies. My mom was a librarian, and it was so cool because in our house, in every room, along every wall, there were just reams and reams and reams of books. I mean, it was so cool. Sometimes I'd take a book off the shelf and I'd sit in a corner all by myself, and I just open up a book. And, you know, I think my mother probably thought I was trying to become a smart kid. But what was happening for me is when I opened up a book, between those binders was magic. It was magic because all of a sudden I was like Cinderella going to the ball. All of a sudden, it didn't matter that they made fun of me. It didn't matter that I had a Southern accent that was so strong and so deep. It didn't matter that I didn't look like them. What mattered is that when I opened up a book, all of a sudden, I was special. All of a sudden, whatever the world thought about me was outside of my purview. It just didn't matter. You know, I want to say something too that, currently I live in the desert. I live in Southern California desert. And before we moved down here, we lived up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I remember one day, and this makes me think of how much I hated myself growing up. I remember one day I was driving into San Francisco from Mill Valley, which is where I lived. And there was a hitchhiker standing right there at the entryway to the freeway. And he was standing there with this huge sign that simply said, "Anywhere but here." That's all it said. Anywhere but here. Now, I was sober a long time when I saw that, but boy, it took me back to that place that I remembered wanting to be anywhere but in this skin, in this body, having the experience I was having. And that's how I felt as a kid. When the kids would make fun of me, when I read books, all of a sudden, I could be anywhere other than where I was. And it was great for a while. It was perfect for a while. And I loved music for the same reason. Music would take me to a different place. I still love music. I loved what used to be considered, or maybe for some people, old movies. Now, when I was growing up, they were not old movies. In fact, all of the women that I loved were all alive. They're all dead now. Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Barbara Stanwyck, Susan Hayward. Those are my idols. Those are women who had a glass in one hand, they had a cigarette in the other, and they didn't take a lot of garbage off anybody. And I love them because for a slice in time, for a moment in time, I didn't have to be me. That's what the books did. That's what the movies did. I didn't have to be me. I didn't have to feel like me, this poor little Black kid who was born in the South, raised in the South Bronx in New York. I hated everything about me. And so with that as a backdrop, it just wasn't a surprise to anybody who eventually knew that when the books and movies stopped working, I was going to find something that gave me the same effect like that. And I was 14 years old when I picked up my first chemical. I didn't put anything down until I was 26. And I'd like to tell you that between those years from 14 to 26, wasn't a lot of time, but boy, I tell you, I packed a lot into the stream of my addiction, because truly by the time I got here, I was so desperate. I'm a product of the 60s. And so for me, it was about better living through chemistry. I used chemicals to come up, chemicals to come down, chemicals to level me off. I mean, I was a hardcore junkie and drinker. I did everything. And I have a tendency still to do everything to excess. I don't even know how to define the word nor spell the word moderation. I know people use it, but I try to think, what does moderation mean? I still don't know what it means, but I definitely didn't know what it meant then. And that's probably why I made it to Alcoholics Anonymous at the age I did, because I didn't have any more time left. I often hear people say, I wish I would have had more time to still be out there, or some people say, I wish I would have come in younger. You know what? I believe I got here when I got here, and I couldn't have gotten here any time sooner, and I couldn't have gotten here one day later. I just didn't have it in me. I was so whipped by the time I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to tell you that the worst thing that ever happened to me as a woman was prostituting myself. It was a horrible thing, and I am definitely a woman who never, ever, ever will tell you that that was a good thing. I know women in AA who still do it, and God bless them, I guess that's what they can do. I do not justify that. But what was the worst thing for this alcoholic woman? That I allowed myself to become a punching bag. Because of my addiction, because I felt so worthless, I allowed men to put their hands on me in ways I would never, ever let them do today. I mean, I still have scars on my body from when I remember I was stabbed with a pair of scissors in my foot. I have body scars to remember those days when I just allowed people to do anything to me. if nothing else, that's what my recovery has given me today, the kind of self-esteem that would never allow anyone to treat me that way. But again, I had to learn that in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not how I came in. I was introduced to AA for the first time in 1978. I did not get sober in 78 because I was too young. That's what I thought. I was only 25 years old, and I thought, you know what? I'm too young, and plus a girl can't be an alcoholic. Now, mind you, in the movies, I remember two women who I knew were alcoholics who I used to watch. Susan Hayward and I'll Cry Tomorrow, you know, where she's digging in the garbage can, trying to get the last bit of booze. I mean, that was actually me, but for the life of me, I conveniently forgot that. Or I remember watching Lee Remick when, you know, she's in the greenhouse and she used to hide her booze in the greenhouse. I didn't have a greenhouse. How could I be an alcoholic? I mean, go figure. That's the thinking of an alcoholic, a sick alcoholic woman like me. But you know what? It doesn't matter what I think. It didn't matter what I thought then. The reality is my behavior demonstrated that alcohol was the problem. And, you know, for me, I am so grateful that I eventually found my way into AA. In June of 1979, I was hit by a car in a blackout. And I had moved from New York to Las Vegas. And what I have learned in AA is a geographic. If you're new and you're trying to figure out what does geographic mean, all it means is that you go from point A to point B, and you think you leave all your baggage back at point A, because that's what I thought. I mean, I thought, you know, I'm moving to Vegas. I don't need to deal with those people, those men that forced me to take all that money. I don't need to deal with them. But you know what? Hello, you know, where I went, where I go, I go. Where I went, I took me right along with me with all my baggage. And it took about, I think it was 9 months from the time I moved to Vegas until I actually, from the time I moved to Vegas, got hit by the car, and then it was a month and a half after I got hit by the car that I actually came into AA. You know, when I got hit by the car, they didn't think that I would live. I was found, and if anybody knows Las Vegas, at least back in the day, today it's very different from when I got sober. But when I got sober, I lived on Paradise Road, and there was none of the tram and all of the trappings that they have now. I lived right across from the DI Country Club, what used to be the Desert Inn Country Club. And when they found me in the street, they found me in a direction opposite from my house on Paradise Road, all the way down Flamingo Way. I lived closer to Desert Inn. And when they found me, they didn't think I was going to live. And when they realized I would live, they never thought I'd ever walk again, because when I was found, my left leg came up behind my head and the bone came straight through. You know, I walk today, I walk with a limp. My left leg is literally an entire inch shorter than my right leg. And I've chosen not to cover up my scar, you know, at least not today. I've had people say, Francine, what an ugly scar. Have you ever thought about having plastic surgery? Because it really is ugly. I mean, I've got like, it's 10 inches long and it has lots of hole marks where all the hardware was. I can only tell you that for today, just for today, I've chosen not to cover it up. Maybe when I turn 43 next month, maybe I'll think about it. Maybe I'll have surgery. I'll think about having surgery then. But just for today, every time I look at this leg, I am reminded of the very high price I pay to take up this seat right here today. I'm reminded of every drink I've ever taken. I'm reminded of every drug I've ever put in my body. I'm reminded of every inappropriate act as a woman I've ever performed. And you know, for that reason, I choose not to cover the leg up, because I want to remember. I wear skirts, I wear shorts, you know, so I'm not hiding it. But again, just for today, I don't want to forget where I've come from, because it is so easy for someone like me who has a different kind of life to forget. I have known many, many, many people in Alcoholics Anonymous over the years who've gone out with decades of sobriety. Just in the last couple of years during COVID, I've seen and heard many stories. I've had former sponsees who went out after years of sobriety. And the only thing that I thought about that made them different than me was that they forgot. They forgot where they came from. They just forgot. And so for me, I don't ever want to forget where I've come from. Plus, I was taught early on that you will never, ever, ever see a grateful alcoholic drunk. And so for me, as long as I live in a place of gratitude, as long as I hold on to even a small slither of gratitude, I have a shot today. It's not promised. My recovery is not promised. But if I stay in the gratitude, and I have to tell you, there were days when the only thing I can be grateful for is that I woke up and I didn't drink. I would love to tell you that every day I'm jumping around like Miss Pollyanna. No, no, and no again. Some days it's like I'm holding on by my fingernails, but I don't pick up. And that's something to be grateful for, coming from the place I've come from. So what I'd like to do is share with you some of the things that have enabled me to stay here. And not just stay here and not drink or use, but to have the kind of life that actually is far beyond anything, absolutely anything I could have ever imagined. I like to call this my patched quilt. And I usually have a visual. Here it is. Here's my patched quilt. So I like to think of the tools of my recovery as patches in this patched quilt. Each one is something that is important to me. I will tell you that I don't believe from my sobriety, one of those things would have kept me sober. It has taken all of these things that I'm going to talk about. And most of these things, everybody here knows about if you've been sober for more than a minute. But for me, I like to put it in terms of my patched quilt because I'm pretty visual and it helps me just remember what enables me to take up and keep the seat warm that you've gifted me with. And believe me, I know today that it's a gift what you've given me. And you know what, like any other gift, if I'm crazy enough, I can re-gift it, but I don't want to. Just for today, I want to hold on to this gift you've given me. So the first thing, one of the patches, and this is probably at the top, but again, this alone would not keep me sober. The first thing for me is abstinence. Now, I used to think that everyone defined abstinence in the same way, but I know today that is not true. But for me, abstinence means I don't drink, I don't use, no matter what, period, no matter what. And I don't even let myself get too close to the edge, because if I get too close, I might just tip over. So I remember when I was new, there were many people, not many, but there were a few people in my meetings that were drinking near beer. And today there are lots of things that are similar to that. They've got things they call non-alcoholic beverages, they've got hard seltzers. Well, excuse me, I remember I would see people drinking this in the meetings when I was new, and I don't know why, something inside of me just, it was like it was like a red light, a light bulb that went off. And I remember asking my sponsor, I said, Louise, is this something that I can take? And I remember she said to me, Francine, if it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it smells like a duck, and definitely if it tastes like a duck, you might want to think it's a duck. And she also said, you know what, you're somebody that's always asking questions. Why don't you do a little research? And what I found is when they call something non-alcoholic, it has booze in it. Number one, if it was juice, they'd call it juice. If it was soda, they'd call it soda. But I discovered that alcohol is usually controlled by the state. And if there's alcohol below a certain amount, They don't have to call it alcohol. They can call it non-alcoholic. Well, I'm an alcoholic. I don't want to drink anything with alcohol, not even a little, because to me, that's drinking. So I stay clear of anything that looks like a duck, that quacks like a duck, that smells like a duck, because again, my sobriety matters so much to me. You know what, today I have more to lose. If I were to pick up today, honestly, I'm not somebody who believes I have another recovery left. I believe if I picked up today, I'm taking the lights out, because if for no other reason, I wouldn't want to be a newcomer again, coming in here and giving the people who don't like me the satisfaction of saying, you see. So I'm not getting too close. I don't drink. I am abstinent. That means no matter what. One of the other pieces of my patched quilt is sponsorship. Now, I am a big proponent of sponsorship. I believe for me, I have always had a sponsor, and I'm somebody who likes to sponsor. Now, sponsorship is not for everyone, and thank God Bill W. himself says in the 12 and 12 in our 12 step, he says there are all different kinds of ways to be of service, all different kinds of ways. So if you come across someone that tells you you have to be sponsoring, you know what? That is not true. That's not true. I happen to like to sponsor women, and I put personally for me, I believe men sponsor men, women sponsor women. Again, that's my personal perspective. Take it for whatever it is. But I like sponsoring women. But I especially feel the need to always have a sponsor, because left to my own devices, I'm out there. Even at 42 years of sobriety, I can, spin a tale in a hot second and justify bad behavior and convince you of that. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I can convince you of anything if I want. No. Thank God my sponsor is also a lawyer, and she's hip to me. So I can't get away with too much there. But having a sponsor is critical. My first sponsor, who is now passed away, Louise, was my sponsor until I was 23 years, and then she went to that big AA meeting in the sky. The other things I'm going to talk about in terms of my patched quilt are things she taught me, and how grateful I am for her. Every day I thank God for the gifts that Louise gave me before she passed away, and I had her up until I was 23 years sober. One of the most important things she taught me is that meetings were important. And I remember she told me I needed to go to meetings every day. And honestly, I didn't really like that. I thought, number one, I thought she was just this old woman. She was way over the hill. She just didn't want a young whippersnapper like me to have fun. So I'm thinking, I don't want to be in those meetings with all those old people. And by the way, she was my age when she was younger than me when she died. And she was still old, in my opinion. But I remember I went to this old timer who had more time than her, and I'm thinking he's gonna tell me what I need to do. So I remember asking him, because I would see him at meetings, and I asked him one day, and I was new. I was about 4 years sober. I asked him, how many meetings do you have to go to? And he looked me in the eye. He said, Francine, I probably only need 2 meetings a week. But because I don't know which 2, I go every day. Oh my God, that is not what I wanted to hear. I'm thinking, this guy, he must have been talking to my sponsor. I did not want to hear I should go to a meeting every day. But do you know what? I go to a meeting pretty much every day. And in the last couple of years on Zoom, there is no excuse. The only time I ever use not going to a meeting is if I was on an airplane or I was actually in a position where I definitely couldn't go. But other than that, I'm a meeting maker. And while I believe that going to meetings wasn't or isn't the only thing that keeps me sober, it is definitely one of my tools in my toolbox. One of the other things that Louise taught me that has become essential to my recovery is service. I got involved in service when I was 3 months sober. And I hated this woman. She sat me on the registration table. I got sober in Vegas, like I said, and right when I got sober, Vegas was having its roundup. At the time, it was at the end of October. Now it's Thanksgiving, I think. And I'm on crutches, and I'm thinking people should be feeling sorry for me. She sat me down on the registration desk and told me this is where I had to sit the whole weekend. I mean, that was a weekend out of my life. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. She made me sit there and look at people I didn't even want to talk to. But you know what happened as a result of that? By the end of the weekend, I'm not going to tell you I was like ecstatic, but what happened is, number one, I was forced to say hello to people who I didn't know and wasn't crazy about. But people said hello to me and people would call me by name. And it was like, wow. You know, I started just a little bit to feel a part of Alcoholics Anonymous because of that first service experience. I've been doing something in Alcoholics Anonymous ever since. When I was 6 months sober, they started letting me do H&I. I went into Jean Prison, which is I don't know if it's still there, but it was a prison right outside of Las Vegas. Every Sunday night, I'd go in with a panel. I started going into high schools. They brought me in because I was relatively young. They send me into high schools to share under the public information banner. And then when I was 2 years sober, I became a GSR. And I've been doing something in general service and in my groups ever since. Ever since. When COVID hit, I started 8 women Zoom meetings. When other people were frantically wondering whether they were going to stay sober, I jumped into high gear because I knew I needed to do it for myself. I started 8 women's meetings, and every single one of them was based on AA literature. That was my service, starting those meetings, showing up every day, whether I wanted to or not, which then takes me to one of the other pieces of my patch quilt that Louise got me involved in, and that's literature. I'm a literature baby, and it's not just a big book for me. I know that there are some people who only subscribe to the big book, and that's fine. But I'm grateful I had a sponsor who introduced me early on to the 12 and 12, to As Bill Sees It, to Living Sober, to AA Comes of Age, to Language of the Heart, to the Grapevine. AA is filled with a plethora of awesome, awesome literature. And, I was grateful to her for doing that, because there were times, like when I was on an airplane or if I was, not in a place where I could get to a meeting right away, I always had a piece of literature in my purse. And it was great because sometimes I could just open it up. And it, for a moment in time, gave me the relief, gave me the support that I needed if I couldn't get to someone on the phone or couldn't get to a meeting. So AA literature for me is so essential. One of the other things that you find on one of the other patches of my patched quilt is God. I didn't believe in God when I got sober. And I can tell you part of it's because of how I was raised. Again, this is just my experience. It's just personal to me. Again, I was born in the South and I was raised in New York, and I was born into a Southern Baptist family. And I discovered early on that there was something not right about that for me. I was born in 1953 in Atlanta, Georgia, when Black men were being openly lynched. And yet on Sunday, my mother and my grandmother would trot me off to church to hear about God and Jesus. And yet during the week, I would hear these stories and see these images on TV. And I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. Even as a young girl, I knew that wasn't right for me. And so I ostracized God from my life very, very early on, very early on. And I wanted no part of a God like that. And so, it's so interesting for me that I truly believe today that it was a God that I didn't believe in that got me to Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was Alcoholics Anonymous that got me to God. Today I am one of those people that we talk about in the 11th step, where I would no more do without my faith than I would air, food, or sunshine. That's who I am today. And I believe that faith that I believe in is so strong and so powerful for me that it has gotten me through things that, honestly, I never thought I could get through. Case in point, the last 2.5 years was difficult for a lot of people, but they were especially difficult for me. right before COVID hit, my husband, who I had been with for almost 24 years, my husband passed away after a very long battle with cancer. And I watched this man that I loved so much. I watched this man before my eyes just whittle away before my eyes. And I do believe all the things that all of the pieces of my patched quilt, they're things that enabled me to get through the last 2.5 years. And especially that faith that was unshakable. And there were times that I didn't believe God was there. I've heard over and over and over again over the years, God will never give you more than you can handle. Well, I was saying over the last couple of years, God, stop loving me so much. Give me a break. Give me a break. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the poem Footprints. Footprints is one of my most favorite poems, and I'm not going to read it for you, but what it means essentially, just to give you an idea, there's this man walking along the beach, and he noticed during the most difficult, the most challenging periods of his life, he noticed only one set of footprints in the sand. And he stopped and he looked up to God and he said, God, what is up with this? You told me that if I followed you, you would always be there. You told me that you would always have my back. And yet, during the most difficult times of my life, I only see one set of footprints. And God looks down on this guy and he says, my son, during those times when you only saw one set of footprints, those are the times that I carried you. And that's been my experience. During the most difficult times of my sobriety, the most challenging periods of my life, God carried me. God carried me in the last 2 years. First, actually, right before my husband passed away, for those of you that love animals like I do, I had just put one of my cats to sleep. And before I could even mourn Mango's loss, my loss of Mango, then my husband went into hospice, and then Richard died. And then right after Richard died, COVID hit. So I found myself sheltered in place, the loss of my freedom, dealing with the grief of having lost my husband. And for any woman in particular who's ever had, or I guess it could be a husband too, who has to deal with the things you have to deal with if you're a surviving spouse, there are many, many, many things to deal with. So I had to deal with those things. And on top of that, my mother died of COVID right after that. So between a 7-month period, over a 7-month period, I had to deal with the loss of my cat, the loss of my husband, the loss of my freedom, and the loss of my mom. I can tell you I was not having a good time. And so it's no wonder that I started all those meetings, because I knew where I needed to be. I knew if I was anywhere too far away from a meeting, I really believed that I could easily tip over the edge. I'm not an alcoholic who believes I'm recovered. I know that is a bone of contention. Everyone has their own opinion. I'm not recovered. I am in recovery, because to me, when I hear the word recovered, that implies it's one and done. Well, you know what? I can't ever get to a point where I think I got this thing covered. I can't get to that point. If by the time I put my head on the pillow tonight, I don't pick up, that's a good day. And if I behave tomorrow like I behaved today, it's likely I'll stay sober, but it's not a guarantee. I've seen that from countless others. It's not a guarantee. My God gives me the courage to show up and suit up when I do not want to. And that's what happened for me over the last couple of years. That's what that powerful faith has done for me. That's my footprints. My God, during the times when I saw only one set of footprints, that's when she carried me. And how grateful I am for that. What you'd also find is one of my patched pieces in my quilt is step work. Now, I make a distinction between just saying the steps, because sometimes we just throw that around. But for me, step work implies I had to do something. I still have to do something. I can't just sit around talking about doing the steps and my feet are not moving in that direction. I believe that the steps are action. And that's why, too, for me, which is something Louise taught me early on, that most of our steps in the big book are located in the into action section. They're not in another section. They are neatly housed in into action because that's what she taught me you need to get busy doing. She said, you know, Francine, if you keep doing the things you've always done, you will continue to get the things you've always gotten. I remember she said to me, if you do a little bit in Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll get back a little bit. If you do a lot, you'll get back a lot. And if you do nothing, you will find yourself wasted or wishing that you are. And so for me, the work in step work implies there's work for me to do every day. Every day. I'm always working the steps, always, because I know, again, for someone like me at this stage of my life, I've got a whole lot to lose, a whole lot to lose. And you know what? I'm not ready to re-gift my recovery. Anyway, you know what? I am just so grateful to be here. I remember when I was new in recovery, they had invited me to make a list of all the things that I wanted out of sobriety. And on that list, you would have found a litany of every single material thing I lost. You would have found fur coats and diamond rings and kitty cats and stereos. You would have never found the things that I value the most. You wouldn't have found things like genuine self-esteem. The kind of self-esteem for me that today comes from walking through fear. You know, I used to think that self-esteem was about being attached to him, being attached to the right guy, you know, being arm candy. I used to think it was about living in the right place. You know, I wasn't driving back then, but still my idea was driving the right car, living in the right location, having the right credentials. That was how you get self-esteem. That's what I used to think. But today, for me, self-esteem is about doing things that I don't necessarily always want to do. I'd love to tell you that even being of service is always easy and convenient. It's not. You know, my mom died of like I said, of COVID, 2020. It's 2 years now. June 25th, 2020, my mother passed away. And before my mom died, I was in New York every single month for 4 years to see my mother. My mother was a double amputee, and from the moment she lost her first leg, I started going to New York every month, and I would go every single month. And I have to tell you, that was not fun. I'd have to get up out of, you know, pay money to go. I lost money because I couldn't work while I was gone. I mean, it was such an inconvenience at times. But so what? You know, what you taught me is that sometimes you just show up and you do the things that you need to do. And every time I did something I didn't want to do, I got to another place. And ultimately, I felt better about myself having done those things. You know, today, self-esteem is about being courageous. I used to think that courage was an absence of fear. I used to buy into the old movies I watched as a kid where the courageous ones were the ones who could beat up on everybody, or the ones who were, you know, they could win in a knife fight or something. But today, for me, courage is about, it's not an absence of fear. Today, it's a willingness for me to be afraid and to tell you that I'm afraid, to tell you the truth and walk through that fear anyway. That's courage. For me, it's, yep, being afraid, but just willing to take one baby step in front of the other and walk through my fear. That's what courage is for me today. What you'd also find on that list of you find God on that list, but you'd also find love. You know, when I got sober, I didn't like anybody. I didn't like men. I didn't like women. That didn't leave a lot of people in between. I mean, I didn't like anybody when I got sober. And yet today, you know, I've come to understand that real love is, well, it's about understanding that sometimes we're different. and loving someone despite their differences, despite how they are, despite who they are. My husband and I were very different. My husband was Jewish, and he was from the Bronx. I was from the Bronx too, but the real diversity issue in my family was that he was a therapist. A therapist and a lawyer coexisting in the same place. That was real love. That both of us could live in the same household, get along, for the most part, get along. That was what you taught me. Love is, it's having a genuinely big heart. And today I realize that my heart it's roomy, it's all encompassing, and there's space in there for all kinds of people. I sponsor all kinds of women today. I have a sponsee she's Iranian, she's Muslim. I have white sponsees, I have black sponsees, I have a Chinese sponsee. Today my life is filled with real love because I've been willing to open it up. Anyway, I think we are about at the end, and I want to close with something from my favorite book, As Bill Sees It. And I like to end with this because it just reminds me of how far I have come in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is in As Bill Sees It on page 4, and it's entitled, Can We Choose? We must never be blinded by the futile philosophy that we are just the hapless victims of our inheritance, of our life experience, and of our surroundings, that these are the sole forces that make our decisions for us. This is not the road to freedom. We have to believe that we can really choose. And that's what you've given me in 42 years of sobriety. You've given me the gift of choice. You've taught me that it doesn't matter where I come from, doesn't matter what color my skin is, doesn't matter what I do for a living, doesn't matter about any of that stuff. You've even taught me that it doesn't even matter whether I believe in God. I happen to, but it doesn't matter if I do or I don't. What you've taught me is that the only thing that really matters in the overall scheme of things is what I do with this most precious gift that you've given me in Alcoholics Anonymous, my sobriety. And not just what I do with it in an AA meeting, because quite honestly, it's relatively easy to be nice in an AA meeting. Relatively easy. The real work is out there in the real world. It's like, how do I treat somebody in traffic, when they cut in front of me? How do I treat somebody on the line in the supermarket when it says no more than 10 items and I'm sitting over there counting how many items they have and pointing my finger at them? Is that sober behavior? How do I treat them? How did I treat my husband when he was alive? Did I treat him like a dog and treat my sponsees like goddesses? Nah. The real work is in our homes. It's out there. It's at work. That's the real work. AA for me is my laboratory. This is where I learn all the tools for living. But the real work for me is, how do I take it out there? Anyway, I want to say thank you again, Stephen, so much for the opportunity to be of service this evening, this afternoon, this morning. And I'm happy to stay on for the after meeting for a bit if people are here, especially if there are any women who want to chat a bit. Thank you.